like to pay a couple respects to the people that
Yeah.
made
So
the
these
world.
days it's been pretty damn cold. Yeah. This
Oh
winter.
man, yeah, it's this is the coldest it's been so far this year, I think.
Yeah, I
At
mean,
least
all
out
of these
here.
under 0 days are really tough. Our poor pup just doesn't like going outside. She's old, and going outside when it's below freezing, she's not warm enough. But at home, of course, we keep our floor heater turned on pretty warm actually
Yeah.
in the winter.
Does your dog do what mine does? Mine will find like hot spots. So I'll
Ah,
find her just kind of like flattened out over some like random spot in the house. Like she would never go there in the summer. But then all of
mm.
a sudden the wind, like the weather changes, it gets cooler, and I find her in like the other room on some like hotspot,
It's
on
funny
the
how
floor.
the hot spots work in the Andol flooring here in Korea. I mean, I'm sure
Yeah.
every house has it. I read somewhere recently that someone was talking about how the I think maybe the really new buildings, it's maybe they use a better technology, and so although it starts with hot spots, I think theoretically it's supposed to like eventually warm up the entire floor.
Hmm.
But we definitely have hot spots. We definitely, it's like this part's hot and this part's not cold, but it's not proper warm.
Yeah. No, we don't have, it's not as like pronounced as it was in some of the apartments that I lived in before. Like I've lived in some
Mm,
older apartments and they definitely had hotspots. And I
okay,
loved it
yeah.
because you find a hotspot and you just put down a blanket and it's so comfortable. It really is
I mean, it
awesome.
makes sense for why Korean people sleep and sit and eat on the floor
Yeah.
traditionally in the past, because the floor is warm. You
Right.
keep your butt warm, you can
Yeah.
sit down on it. It's really nice. And I mean, really, it's just logical as well because heat rises,
Right.
right?
Yep.
So you make the bottom hot, and it will in turn make everything else hot as well. Because I know, like in the heaters that I had when I was in Arizona, and I was up in Flagstaff, Arizona, for anyone in the States and who thinks like Arizona's desert. It gets cold in Flagstaff
Oh,
in the
I'm
winter.
sure.
And that was more of like a central air heating, which is that's just blasting hot air coming
Yeah,
up from the roof.
right into the room. Yeah.
From the, yeah, which is nice. It still heats everything, but it's just it's hot air coming from above, and so it definitely heats things differently
Yeah.
from the floor
It's
heating
I'm from
to it.
Minnesota, so I know cold weather. I'm
What kind
like
of heating
Bane,
did you guys
like
have there?
we have central heating, the same like central air conditioning in most
Hmm.
houses or a lot of houses, and
Where did
then
the air pump out from? Up
so
above or
you have a
low?
furnace in your basement usually,
Right.
and then you have a ventilation system in with vents all over your. Some of the vents actually do come out of the floor sometimes,
Okay.
and some of the vents come out of the wall or the ceiling,
Uh,
and so but it does essentially blow hot air into the air of the room, into the center of
mhm.
the room essentially. And so when you walk in, the whole room is kind of warm. But I think that's why we wear slippers in the West, when you ever slippers or have wool socks around the house, is
Right.
because your feet get
The
cold.
floor is still
The floor
cold.
is not, yeah,
Yeah,
you wouldn't find like a hot spot on the floor unless you're right
of
next to
course.
the vent where the hot air is coming
Right,
out.
where the air is blowing in.
Yeah.
Yeah, and something. So we're going to be talking today about this article from Korea Times, right?
Hmm.
And or Korea Herald, sorry. And they're talking about something interesting. I didn't realize that the floor heating, they kept referring to modern floor heating not as ondol. They said it's essentially ondol.
Right.
And I just thought that it was the same thing. I mean, it's based on the same general technology, which is heating the
Yeah.
floor,
But
but
but they
it's
heat it
different from
by,
the traditional.
it's like a radiator, like a boiler that
Right.
heats up
It's
water,
just heating. Yeah, and goes
and
through.
so it's like sleeping on a kind of like a radiator or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, my university back in Flagstaff, because it snows, they get proper snow in the winter. A lot of the sidewalks actually in that university are heated, and
Oh
I guess it's the
yeah.
same thing. I thought that was really crazy as well, that
Melts
they
the
would
snow
have
right
just
off of it, right? And the
exactly.
ice. Yeah.
Yeah, so when you're walking between classes and things, you'd have like massive piles of snow next to you, but walking on the sidewalks were just wet.
Yeah.
And I mean, you wouldn't notice, it didn't feel warm, of course, it was just warm enough to melt the snow.
Yeah.
But yeah, so floor heating is I've never seen it outside before or since then, but that was kind of cool.
Yeah. And so in Korea, like now, since like I guess the early 90s,
Mhm.
they kind of, and even before, they started to change over to the gas model boiler,
Right.
you know, that runs on, I guess, natural gas, and
Yeah, I'd assume so.
I think, and then heats the floor by running hot water through the floor. What about the traditional hanok? You know, the old houses. Like, how did that the what is the undol exactly? Like, what's the setup for that?
Yeah, well, so all I knew about it was that it's the same thing. It's the hot floors,
Mhm.
right? And that I just thought that they would just like, scoop, trees or coal under and just cooked under
That's what I thought
the
too. And
floor.
I thought, why?
I
How did
didn't,
they not burn down immediately?
right?
You know what I mean? Like, there's a
Yeah,
fire underneath your floor, and you're gonna sleep on. You go to sleep. You know,
yeah.
that's
And clearly to anyone listening, you now know that Kevin and Jack are not engineers because that's a stupid idea.
right, right.
Um,
Yeah,
that just
yeah.
does not work.
I'm sure that was the first.
Um,
The first Andal just went up in flames. Or sorry, the first Hanok, house. They're
yeah,
like, no,
it
that
was
didn't
like,
work. Yeah, we got to try
let's
something
heat
else
the
here.
floor. Oh, and
Yeah,
we just turned the whole walls on fire as well. At least
it's
top.
too hot. Yeah,
But yeah, so the original Andal was basically, I mean, you found some really cool images, which I think would be cool to share in the notes for people to check out, because although
yeah.
we're going to do our best to describe it for you here, sometimes visual medium are very cool. It is helpful. So do you want to define it? Describe it
Yeah,
a little? You
sure.
found these cool
Well, I
pictures.
think what's really cool is that, okay, so first you have the Hanok, the house is elevated, right? So I would say it's probably
Right.
like 3 or 4 feet above the ground, something like that,
Yeah, yeah. So
like a
there's
meter.
always steps to walk up into the house,
Yeah.
of course.
So it's elevated, and you have like the wood flooring is the top layer. And then
Right.
underneath
That's what you're
that,
stepping on.
yeah, which is what you're sleeping on, and that's like and it's usually made from, like, in those days, made from real wood. It was,
Right.
and we're talking about, we should mention that we're talking about aristocrats living right now. Although I think, if you go ahead, please.
No, so although I'll save, I've got another piece of trivia that we'll get to in a minute, but I think yes, although the aristocrats did use the Ondol heating, I don't think it was exclusive to them. I
Mhm.
think, I mean, maybe like really poor people couldn't afford this type of house. Their houses were lower, but still, even the middle classes did have Ondol heating as
Okay.
well. What was different about the middle class, like a hanok, for anyone who's listening, hanok just means traditional Korean house, right? So when you see, like, if you watch like period dramas and things like that, like the people, and again, like a hanok is probably someone who's somewhat well off,
Mhm.
not like the peasants back in the day. Like
Right.
they were living much more in, just for
Kind of
lack of a better word, like a,
thatch
yeah,
roof
that's
houses, mud
right.
walls, essentially clay,
Yeah,
stuff like
they
that.
may not have had the indoor heating, which is hard to know. But something that's really cool that I learned about, I did one of those palace tours way back in the day, right? And the palaces, when you go to see the palaces, they're very colorful.
Hmm.
Do you know why hanoks are not very colorful?
No.
It has to do with the Andor, actually. Because although they could afford an Andor house, they could afford to have this general heating thing, what they were burning was very different. So we'll
Uh,
explain how the Andor works in a minute, but generally you're creating a fire under your house and the heat goes through. So the less rich people would be burning wood, and wood creates a lot of smoke. Smoke destroys paint, and
mm,
that's why the poorer people, or the more normal Hanok type people, would be living in more or less brownish homes,
yeah.
whereas the palaces, they were rich, they're the kings, of course, and so they were burning charcoal,
Okay.
and so they're still
Yeah.
getting the heat, but it's not producing smoke, and therefore it's not damaging the paint of it. And so that's why
Wow.
you see colorful palaces, but traditionally the Hanoks are not colorful. It has to
Okay.
do with the paint.
Oh, that's fascinating. I
Yeah, it's one
hadn't
of the
thought of
cool
that
things
about
that
that.
I
Yeah.
learned from that tour. It's one of the few things I remember because I took that tour like a decade ago.
Oh, that's
But
so cool. Yeah.
yeah, that was one of my
Um,
favorite pieces of trivia, so that's why I put
yeah.
it in my head.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that's super interesting. Because yeah, they talked about, like, the the Hanoks, the newer ones, like, in the 70s and 80s or whatever, people that were living in these houses that were still poor as Korea was
Mhm.
developing were burning charcoal
Right.
in
And at
the
that point,
Ondo. Yeah.
charcoal is no longer very expensive too.
Right.
Even
Something I ran across, like in 1920, I think Japan brought over we'll talk about this a little bit too, yuntan bricks, which is the charcoal bricks, and you could burn those 2 or 3, 1 to 3 a day would heat a house
right.
in I believe. But we
Yeah,
should
so when I'm
probably
talking
I
about
should
burning
probably
coal
talk about
versus burning wood, that's like way back in the day.
right. And
Yeah.
it's hard to come by, even sometimes from what I read, even finding wood was difficult sometimes.
Yeah, could have been.
So you have, if you think of the Hanok and the Undol system as like moving from either left to right or right to left, so you're looking at the picture. So on one side of the house, you have the cooking area, essentially the kitchen, and it's like a big stove. And so this is why I love it. It's genius. Like this whole setup is really smart. And so you have a big stove where all the cooking is done, and that's where there's a big fire, and that is next to the house, but it's not directly under the house. That makes sense. Okay.
Yeah. It's just off to the side.
Yeah,
I think sometimes cooking areas have been. I've been to some hanoks in like traditional villages and things, where although it was off to the side, I think sometimes it was still in like a covered area, like it was still inside.
Oh, okay. So they had a roof or whatever. They built
exactly. They had a roof and walls in many
Okay.
cases as well.
Okay.
So it wasn't completely outside. The picture that we're looking at here shows it completely outside. There might have been different styles. I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah,
but I've
probably
definitely seen
for weather
the kitchens
purposes.
inside.
Yeah, you had more money. You're like, oh, we have it's just like an outdoor kitchen or an indoor kitchen. I guess if you have more money,
but still, it would be it's outdoors, but covered outdoors.
Yeah, and not heated by the undul, because this is where the fire is. So so what happens is there's underneath the house there's a large chamber, and the chamber has an incline, I guess we could say. So there's like a lip next to the fire, and I believe that the lip is called you have to help me with the Korean here, bunumgi j agungi.
Which one? Which image are you looking at?
Oh, I'm looking at
the
second one. Yeah.
So yeah, the unumgi. Why is it not written in Hangul?
It's written in English, so yeah, we're struggling here.
Yeah. These that's hard for me to translate. What these words? I would guess that the gi at the end might have to do with the air, but yeah.
I think it is just it kind of blocks the. I think it's actually two things. I'm sorry. The J agungi is kind of the wind protector. It helps the fire not to blow out, I believe. Or it doesn't allow too much of the fire or too much of the heat to go inside at a time. So it just kind of controls like the nozzle, like how much of this
kind of like
are you going to let in?
I think in a fireplace that would be called the flue, right?
Yeah, I think you're right. So this would be like it's kind of permanent in an ondol hanuk, like this,
you can't change it and move it around.
You can't change it and move it around, but that's exactly what it is. And then as it goes in, there's another lip that's called the bunumgi, and this is just kind of shaped. This is the way they shape as they dig out this hole underneath the house, this chamber. This is part of the design, is that it has a lip, because they don't want to let too much of the heat and stuff come in, and they also don't want too much wind to blow through.
This is what's really interesting and amazing about the engineering of this is figuring out how the wind flows through here, because as you know, if you've ever tried to light a fire, you need wind for fire, but you don't want too much of it as well. So
right, because they don't want to
burn.
Ingenious. Yeah, it can't be too hot, otherwise the floor, you can't sleep on it if it gets a too high a temperature. But if you're not letting enough of the heat in, it's too cold. So it's very much about it's all about the engineering. It has to be the right size and the right amount of air flowing through, and heat from the fire flowing through this chamber. So it starts with the fire in the kitchen, it moves through this chamber, and so the main chamber there's an incline because heat rises. And so that's why I thought, oh, that's so smart, right? It has like an incline, so the heat just kind of travels up slowly up this incline, and it heats these stones, which they call gumdo, I believe. Is that right?
Actually, but I can't believe I never made this math before. On means heat, dol
Mhm.
means stone.
Oh, okay. There you go.
So
Stone heat,
the Korean literally means like heated stone.
heated
Now
stone.
when
Yeah,
now I looking at this image, I suddenly realized why
put
it's
it
called
together.
undo. So that's why it's called undo. So everyone who's listening, you've just learned this at the same time I did.
Heated stone. There you go. And that's, I mean, that's the cool part about it, is why the floor doesn't start on fire, is because it's warming up these large stones that are placed underneath the bricks, which and then underneath that, the clay brick floor is the wood floor. So you have three
Right. So it
layers.
slowly radiates the heat from
Right.
one layer to the next
It
until
heats
it
up the
gets to hopefully a
stones,
comfortable temperature.
heats up the clay, that heats up the wood, that eventually heats your body. And this all
Right.
comes from the fire that you've been cooking on. You're cooking food on this fire. And so you're basically heating your house at the same time you're able to prepare your food. And so you're getting two, 1+1 kind of deal here. You're
Yeah.
heating your house, and it serves another practical purpose as well. And then there's another lip at the end, before it goes into the chimney. There it kind of goes through, I don't know I would say, over a lip, and then kind of comes down a little bit to something called the geijari.
Yeah,
And
but I guess
that's
this
like
is all probably for wind movement and
yeah. And as
just keeps things going.
it's hard to explain without looking. You'll have a much better idea if you look at the picture. But essentially, this hot air blows right through very smoothly. It rises right up and it heats that floor underneath, and then the smoke comes out of chimney on the other side of the hanok, and so you get
Yeah,
all
so
the
the
benefit of
heat
that
just
heat.
starts at one side of your house and completely travels under it, heating everything, cooking your food, and the smoke goes out the other side,
Yeah.
and everyone is happy and warm. And apparently, according to this article, like it got pretty hot in some of these houses. It looks like this.
Yes.
They quoted this British writer from the 19th century, Isabella Bird Bishop. What an interesting name. And she was saying that it was getting, I guess I'm assuming they're using Fahrenheit here, because otherwise this would be crazy. But they're saying that it was getting up to like 80, 85, 92 degrees, or even 100 degrees, which would be like almost 40 for our not crazy temperature people in the world.
Yeah.
So I mean that's like a hot house. What do you, like, we keep our house in the winter, we have it set on a timer, not necessarily a temperature, but we try and keep it only around like 20-ish or so. Like, so
Yeah, same with us. We keep it rather cool, just kind of stable, but just
yeah.
enough to you have to kind of wear use a blanket, or wear a
Yeah, I mean, it's
hoodie
the
or
winter.
whatever.
Put on more
Yeah,
clothes.
just put on more clothes and save the
I've
money
turned into my
for.
dad.
Yeah, I know.
Turn the heater down.
Also, they had it really helped with like insects and pests.
Sure.
So rats and bugs couldn't survive underneath those, because it
Oh,
was too
right, because they're
hot.
actually going to cook out of the house.
Yeah, and ants couldn't eat the wood in the house, because the smoke was a pesticide against the ants. So
even more bonuses for the same thing. You get to cook your food, heat your house, keep the bugs and rats out. This is a win-win-win.
it's awesome. It's a great design. So it
Very
lasted for
cool.
a long time. Yeah.
Yeah, in the article we will say that although this is very traditional Korean style, it may not have come originally from Korea, but that doesn't mean that Koreans didn't use it very well and use it for themselves.
Mm-hmm. And what about after the transition from Ondol to let's say the developing years in Korea, from 70s, 80s? Did you find anything interesting about their switch to Yuntan bricks, which is the coal bricks?
No, I
Or
don't know much about
briquettes?
these Yuntan bricks, although
Yeah.
it sounds like you found something interesting, but I don't know much about it, other than that I know that these days still, like, some families still use those, but those tend to be like, the poor people, that, because I always see donation drives every year, like donate money to send Yuntan to these people, to these charcoal brick, to these people who need it. And although a little bit off topic, I understand that has actually gotten harder during Corona days, because part of that volunteer drive is not only donating money to for the bricks, but actually carrying these charcoal bricks up to people's homes.
Mm-hmm.
And fewer people are going out to volunteer these days.
Oh, so and these are probably like elderly people that live in small
Yes, they tend to
houses.
be.
Yeah. So
Yeah, much
like
older homes.
I'll use an example of where I saw Yuntan bricks being used was in my neighborhood. We went to a florist, and they have a large greenhouse with like that that like plastic, clear plastic. It's a building, but the walls
Right.
are made out of clear plastic, and it's a giant greenhouse, and they need to keep it humid inside because they've got a lot of exotic plants and trees and stuff like that. And so what I noticed was that the way they heat it is by burning those Yuntan bricks, and then the heat goes up through this series of pipes and gets piped into the room, keeping it really warm and toasty, almost
Cool.
humid during the winter months in Korea.
Well, that makes sense.
So,
And I mean, those bricks
yeah.
overall aren't very expensive. So for a business or something like that,
Yeah.
I know, like, yeah, these days our home, of course, doesn't use it. My wife, I mentioned this to her. She said that their home way back when she was younger, they had an Onton house, and they Yuntan, there we go, house, and they used those bricks back in the day, but
Yeah.
not for a
My,
very
my
long time.
wife told me even in her apartment, some apartments had you bought the apartment, so you get the room, but then in the basement you have your storage area where you put Yuntan bricks. So each it's like a locker essentially. It's like these are my Yuntan, these are my neighbors and stuff like that. And so
Well, I remember seeing we were talking about TV shows, just was that last week, 2 weeks ago, whatever. And there was some TV show that I saw. It might have been Reply 1988, because that's still old enough where bricks were being used. But
yeah, for sure.
it probably wasn't. I'm thinking it was a different show, but I don't remember which, unfortunately. But I remember seeing how they basically, no, I think it was that house, because they had, or that show, because they had like a big storage room outside their house, which was only used for storing these charcoal bricks. And I remember the part of the show was that they wanted to pretend that they weren't very poor, and so they borrowed their neighbors' bricks, just moved them all into their house to, like, because like some relatives or somebody were coming over, and they wanted to appear not poor. And so they're like, look, we have a collection of 200 bricks.
Look at all
We're
of our
set for the winter.
Yuntan. Yeah.
Exactly.
Full collection.
Exactly. Like, yeah,
it's
good for the winter.
I have a couple stats here. 1988, 78% of Korean households used Yuntan. So this was my wife, when she. So
it makes sense if I saw it in Reply 1988.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense, right? And then by 1993, 5 years later, 33%. So
wow.
Korea just made this fast shift to, I guess, to natural gas or to gas.
Wow, very cool.
Yeah, as opposed to Yuntan. So and the Yuntan is made of this like kind of soft charcoal powder mixed with a gluing agent. And so you creates a brick that's like this kind of cylindrical looking brick. And I'm trying to think of like where you would see one. You would definitely see them at like a Galbi restaurant. You ever see them, when they drop the Yuntan in there? And it's like a miniature one. It's a smaller one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. For people who are kind of trying to picture it, it's round. It's probably maybe like 15 centimeters, like in diameter or something like that. It's like about that round, and maybe about the same height, though, like a cylinder. And there's a bunch of, like, a whole ton of holes, like maybe like like a half dozen holes in the middle of it that would allow the heat and the fire to just quickly cook the whole thing.
Yeah. And by 2001, 2% of households. So you can see how
2%.
quickly the Yuntan, because the problem is there's a risk of carbon monoxide poisoning when you're using coal.
Yeah, that's what my wife mentioned. And actually, although just going to take a dark turn really fast, that's actually apparently a somewhat, or maybe it was, I'm not sure.
No, it still is. I know what you're going with this. Yeah.
It's a somewhat common suicide method in Korea. To, instead of in America, you close the garage and turn on your car and go for carbon monoxide.
Here you get a hotel room, and well, I don't want to say how to do this, but essentially you find a closed space and you light one of those bricks, and you will poison yourself.
Yep. So that's interesting that it's only 2% as well. I'm kind of surprised, considering how every year, I know that there's still all these charity drives to deliver them and things. It would almost, but I guess 2%.
But 2% of like of 50 million or whatever, is still a lot of people.
No, it's very true.
Yeah, and I think it's just too dangerous. I'm sure there were probably on the news, entire families were just died from this.
Yeah, if you've got bad air circulation or something
every
in your
winter.
home.
Yeah, somebody shuts the window or whatever and forgets, so yeah, it's a very efficient burning tool, but it's not safe. And so
Yeah.
switching over to gas is much better. So that's it. I think, we talked about the Undul, we talked about the Yuntan. Did you want to mention anything about the Nubu quilting? I don't know if we
I
have
don't really know much about
time.
that. It's
Yeah.
just basically traditional. It's like traditional clothes back before they had, down padding. Now that every kid here has their North Face jacket. This was
I know,
the old style North Face
Yeah.
jacket. Just basically padded cotton, special
Yeah.
padded cotton. But it seems that they were
It
very
was for the rich. It was for
Right.
wealthy people, though, essentially.
Yeah.
Just
It's just an extra layer of warmth that they had in the past. But no, I mean, Korea, in like every country, I mean, we get cold. It gets cold everywhere. That's why we had the Winter Olympics here just, a few years ago. But the floor heating is something that I have grown to love. I like
me too.
the floor heating.
Yeah.
It just
I've
makes
moved
sense.
to the floor. I've spent a lot more time on the floor in Korea, because of that.
Actually, we do as well. Like
Yeah.
it's surprising how like we have a floor table that we'll eat at in the winter, like half of the time. Sometimes we'll sit at the main table, sometimes we'll just pull out the floor table and
Yeah.
camp down. Depends on what our dog is doing, more or less for us. But yeah, sitting on the floor, I mean, it makes sense why people sleep on the floor. It makes sense why people sit on the floor, because the floor is warm.
So it's warm. Yeah.
It's not as hard as people think it is, because you just put blankets and make the floor soft, but that heat still radiates through and still keeps you warm.
And the funny thing is, like, I mean, this is why I love doing this podcast, is because it does kind of put ideas together. It's like, Asian people don't just sit on the floor because, you know what I mean? Like there's usually some kind of reason. There's like historical,
Right.
answer.
We heated the air differently.
Right. And so it kind of makes sense that we would be up, in the warmer air, as in a traditional house, it's heated the air, as opposed, with a fireplace that's just kind of emanating, warm air. And all of these things connect as well. So you're saying, like, we sit on the floor, Asian people sleep on the floor because the floors are warm. Well, that's also why we take off our shoes when we enter the house in Korea. Because you don't walk on your bed in America with your shoes on. Right.
And it's the same thing here. I don't want to walk on my bed with my shoes on, but here my floor would be my bed. Well, in a traditional, we have a mattress, but
and now everything's mixed, Western and Eastern. But yeah, I mean, there's still a lot of families that they sleep on the floor, and you wouldn't wear your shoes
my mother-in-law
anywhere
still
inside
sleeps on the floor, and she sets out a big like mat. She's got a nice like floor mattress type of thing. Well, it's more just a bunch of blankets, but she still sleeps on the floor, and she, I think, prefers it. She likes the hardness, the firmness of
after all those years. How do you switch away from that? How do you go back? So
exactly. So
yeah,
cool information.
Yeah,
nice and quick today for a stash.
Yeah, this is just we're doing a bonus episode right here. And Kev, thanks, man. That was a great topic and really interesting and fun to talk about. Thanks for tuning in for the extra version, the extra soul patch this week. That's right. You get a bonus episode, just like the kitchen and the Undul heating system. You get 1+1 here. There you go. You can go to our website, thesoulpatch.com, and you can download all the episodes there on several different platforms. If you could give us a good review in Apple Podcasts, that would be really helpful. And you can also see us on YouTube. So you can find us all over the place. We're everywhere. And that's the Soul Patch, or the Soul Stache, I should say. There we go. So, all right. Thanks, Kev. We'll see you next time, man. Yep. Cheers.
I'd like to pay a couple respects to the people that made me what I am today.
Laughing gear.
It's all my love. It's all my love.
The quiet man.
It's all my love. It's all my love.
Dopamine. Jim.
It's all my love. It's all my love. It's all my love.
The brain.
It's all my love. It's all my love.
Hey Bobby, let the bass go. Call me an eater, call me a dime.